Hi guys, it's Lindsay. Welcome back to The Wandering Reader. Today I'm going to be doing my May wrap up, and in May I read a total of 11 books and 3,075 pages, which, if you guys have watched my June TBR, I didn't feel like I had a great month reading wise in May. I felt kind of under a lot of pressure and things were really busy at work. If you haven't seen my June TBR, I'll link it for you. So actually when I added up how many pages that I'd read and how many books that I'd read, I was actually really pleased with the total. So I'm going to jump in to the first book. The first book that I read in May was Sight by Jessie Greengrass. I have a full review of this on my channel, which I'll link for you in the card symbols if you haven't seen that already. So I'm not going to talk too much about it here, but this is basically a book that's very character driven and is all about our main character, who is pregnant for certain points in the book, but it also jumps back and forth in time, and it deals with her as a child, and she looks at her own mother and her own grandmother, and then that's interspersed with bits of bits where we're kind of following people who've made medical discoveries. This wasn't my favourite, although I did really appreciate the writing in here and the different things that she was doing, and I ended up giving this 3 stars. Next up, I listened to Little Monsters by Cara Thomas on audiobook. I downloaded this from my library's free audiobook service and listened to it, and this basically follows our main character, who at the beginning of the book she goes to this weird sort of place in their town, and I can't remember the name of it now, but it's associated with bad luck and that sort of thing. And then one of her best friends goes missing, and it's about her and one of her friends trying to unravel the mystery of where her friend has gone, basically. I quite like this. The audio narration was quite good. It was nice to listen to. Sometimes I find audiobooks a bit hit and miss depending on who they're narrated by, but I quite like the narration on this one. I did really like the story. I thought it had a lot to say about teenage angst and anxiety, but also it covered some really important issues in there, like family and you know, trying to work out who you are, and friends and friendship and that sort of thing. So I did really end up enjoying this one, and I gave this one 4 stars. Next I read Pax, and this is by Sarah Pennypacker, and again I picked this up from the library, but it was a physical copy of it. I absolutely loved this book. This is a children's book that follows a little boy, I think he's something like 10 or 11, and his fox, and at the very beginning of the book he has to be separated from this fox that he took in when the fox was a baby, and he kind of like brought it up, and he has to let go of this fox in the forest and drive off. His dad makes him do it, and then basically it's a story about him trying to find his way back to this fox against the backdrop of what I think is the Second World War, but I'm not entirely sure. They don't make that really obvious, and there are some things going on that make it a bit sort of more ambiguous than that, but against the backdrop of war nonetheless. This was such an incredibly sweet story, and there were some lovely illustrations in this one as well. Yeah, and I just loved it. I would highly recommend picking this one up, and I gave it 5 stars. Next up I read Sing Unburied Sing, and this is by Jesmyn Ward. Again, I've done a full review of this, so I'll link it for you if you haven't seen that. This basically follows Jojo, and Jojo is, I think, sort of 10 or 11 in the book, and he goes on this car journey along with his mother, his younger sister and his mother's friend to pick up his dad from prison. He's just been released, or he's going to be released when they pick him up. And it's about, it follows them on this car journey, and you get some insight into their lives and things like that. Just really powerful, beautifully written. I really enjoyed it, and I gave this one 4.5 stars. Next up, again from the library, I read Goodnight Stories for Rebel Girls, and this is by Elena Favelli and Francesca Cavello. And I absolutely loved this. I must pick up my own copy of it because I really want to have one on my shelf. This is basically a series of very short, they're not, I wouldn't really call them stories, they're more like information pages, although they do start "there was a time" or "once there was a woman," and they're all about different women throughout history, and some of them I already knew about and others I had absolutely no idea about them. And each of them are illustrated by lots of different illustrators. So for example, this is a woman called Jacote Delahaye, and look at the illustration here, it's just absolutely stunning. And then who else have we got in here? Maria Callas, and that's the illustration of her. So lots of different styles of illustrations in here. This is somebody called Maya Gabera, and again this is sort of more of a cartoony sort of illustration. Loved the illustrations in here, loved finding out lots of things about women I didn't know, but also women I did know some things about as well. It's the kind of book where you think, oh my god, I must go and read a biography of that woman now, or an autobiography, just because I want to find so many more things out about them. So I must pick up my own copy of this because I want to dive a bit more deeply into it and kind of get to know these women in a bit more detail, and I definitely want to pick up the second one of these as well. Loved this, and I gave it 5 stars. Next up I read Homefire, and this is by Camilla Shamsi. Again, I've done a full review of this on my channel, so I'll link it for you. This basically tells the story of 3 siblings, and the eldest sibling, Isma, she goes away to America to do her graduate studies and leaves behind her twin brother and sister. And then something happens with the twin brother, and he gets pulled into the sort of this terrorist sort of world, and the story goes from there. It's absolutely fantastic. It gave me so much insight into modern issues in the world today and into the immigrant experience and things like that. I found it fascinating, and yeah, like I said, I've done a full review of this, so you can go and watch that if you haven't done already, and I gave this one 4.5 stars. Next up I read In a Dark, Dark Wood, and this is by Ruth Ware. This is the first book that Ruth Ware wrote, and this basically is a thriller that focuses around our main character called Nora, and one day she gets an email from the best friend of somebody that she used to go to school with but she hasn't heard from in 10 years, inviting her to this woman's hen do. And she can't really work out why it is that she's being invited to this hen do when she hasn't spoken to her for 10 years. She kind of ums and ahs about whether she should go, and eventually she decides to. And this hen do is in a cottage in the middle of the woods, and sort of strange things start happening when they get there, and the story goes from there. I kind of enjoyed this. It engaged me enough to keep me reading and wanting to finish it, but I didn't find it thrillery enough. I could sort of see some of what was coming, other bits and pieces I didn't see. I wasn't really that compelled by the main character or any of the other characters. It was kind of alright, but I think it's going to be quite forgettable at the same time, and I ended up giving this 3 stars. The next book that I finished in May was When I Hit You, and this is by Mina Kandasamy. This is another book that I've done a full review on, so I'll link that for you if you haven't seen that. Loved this. This is basically about a woman and her husband abuses her both physically and emotionally, and it's about her experience in that marriage, how he abuses her, how she deals with it, and it's just absolutely fantastic. The writing in here, brilliant. The issues it dealt with so well, and just felt like I learned so much from it. Absolutely fantastic. Gave this one 5 stars. Another book from the library that I read in May was Places I Stopped on the Way Home, and this is by Meg Fee, and I picked this one up because of Lucy, and her blog is called The Lit Edit. I'll leave a link to it down below. She was talking about this on Twitter, and she said that she really enjoyed it, and this is a non-fiction memoir that's set in New York, and this basically follows Meg Fee in her 20s when she's trying to find love. And I just felt myself connecting to her as a person so much, not because her experiences in her 20s were very similar to mine, because they weren't, but she just had so many really insightful things to say about being a woman in your 20s and trying to find love and questioning who you are and finding yourself, and the kind of the troubles that you come up against, and yeah, just so many really insightful things about being a woman in your 20s, set against the backdrop of New York. So each chapter was named after a place in New York. So you had like 66th Street and Williamsburg and John F. Kennedy International Airport. And then, not that she was kind of describing those places, but they were used as a bit of a backdrop for that particular moment. So that moment happened there, or it was that place was significant in some sort of sense to do with what she was talking about. They're just basically a series of what I think may have been originally blog posts, because she does have a blog, but they're almost like vignettes or very short little articles, not all articles, but sort of, yeah, posts. I don't really know how to describe it, but I found it just fascinating, and I found myself connecting to her so well, and yeah, I just loved it. I think if you are a woman in your 20s, this would be a great book to read, just to kind of be able to identify with some of the things that she's talking about. But also, if you're a bit older than that, just looking back on the experience of trying to find a partner, or being in your 20s or whatever. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. Loved it. I will be picking up my own copy of this because I want to have it on my shelves. It's a really pretty book anyway, and I gave this one 5 stars. And then the last book that I finished in May was Brain on Fire, and this is by Susanna Cahalan. And this is a non-fiction book that I've been reading since January. It's not very long, it's only about 250 pages, but I just didn't feel compelled to pick it up the whole time, so it's taken me this long. I finished it on the last day of May, which is ridiculous. So that's taken me 5 months to read this book, and it really shouldn't have. I think I wasn't as compelled to pick this up because... Let me just talk about what it's about first of all. This is a non-fiction book which follows Susanna's experience of what she calls her month of madness. So basically, something happened to her in her brain, and she was ill basically for this month, and she documents her experience, how she was diagnosed, what her treatment was like, and then what her life is like now. And I think, just going back, I think what sort of put me off picking this up so much was I found it quite dense at times, in terms of there was a lot of medical jargon in here, which she did explain, so I understood what she was talking about, but at the same time I was kind of like, oh, you know, that's a bit dense. I liked more the bits where she was talking about her own experience and her family's experience when she was ill and after she recovered. I found those bits a bit more compelling, but I did enjoy it nonetheless. I was umming and ahhing about my rating for this, but I ended up giving it 3.75 stars. So there you go guys, they were all the books that I read in May. I'm going to be doing a different type of wrap up next month, so I often find that when I get to the end of a month and I've read a lot of books, I find it really hard to remember a lot of the details and a lot of the reasons why I liked it and I didn't like it from earlier in the month. So what I decided to do in June, just as a trial, and I did talk about this on Twitter, is I've decided to do a vlog style wrap up. So next month I'm just going to be, every time I finish a book, I'm going to be vlogging me talking about it, and then I'm going to sort of edit all of those bits together with an intro and an outro, and yeah, present that to you instead. Maybe my thoughts will be a bit more coherent. I suppose you might say that, I don't know, some of you will say that you found this quite coherent anyway, but I just kind of find that I could be more detailed and more coherent in my review if I do it as I go along. So I'm going to try that. We'll see how it goes. When I put it up at the end of June, you can let me know your thoughts and whether you enjoyed it or not, but there we go. That was a bit of a ramble, a bit of a side note, but that's what I'm going to be doing in June. So as always guys, let me know down in the comments below, have you read any of these books and what did you think of them, and what was the best book that you read in June? Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.